So we've washed it over with the white snow camouflage and put a slogan in Russian, at least we hope it's in Russian. Now what we're looking at here is the KV-1, and KV stands for Klimenty Voroshilov. He was a member of the Politburo and a close friend of Joe Stalin for a while, so that's why the tank was named after him. He didn't seem to have anything to do with it otherwise. It is a heavy tank, even by Soviet standards, and that means it weighs a good deal, and because of that it has very wide tracks, 27 inches they are, and it was done to lower the overall ground pressure, because with a tracked vehicle it's the weight of the tank on the tracks and then on the ground that is measured rather than the actual individual weight of each wheel. The thing to notice actually, by the way, with the wheels is that they aren't rubber shrouded, they are metal on metal. It's quite unusual, but the Russians were getting very short of rubber for a while, and that's the main reason. The trouble is they do say it's rather noisy, so you've got metal wheels running on metal tracks, but most people don't seem to worry. The British did it and never had any serious problem with it. The tank uses torsion bar suspension, and this is interesting because we're still trying to find the original of the torsion bar, and it seems to be a sort of toss-up between the Russians and the Germans. But it's considerably advanced for a tank that first came out in 1939, to see it with this type of suspension. But this system, using this type of wheel and the suspension, went right through and was used on the JS series of, the IS series of tanks, including the IS-3, the Stalin, and the T-10, the post-war thing. So the actual system is very acceptable and works very well. The British have never liked torsion bars. You'll never find a British main battle tank with torsion bar suspension, only our auxiliary vehicles. But on the tanks we fit our suspension on the side. But that's how it is on the KV-1. You've got torsion bars, so each wheel is independently sprung and has a fair amount of leeway for going over rough ground and that kind of thing. But that's the reason it's done like that. Now the tank itself, which you can see behind me, is a classic example of a heavy tank. The armour on the front is up to 100 millimetres thick, and that for 1939-1940 is really quite an impressive thickness. This particular tank is the version that came out in about 1941, and it was sent to Britain as a sample, although we've dolled it up a bit and made it look a bit like a tank as actually used in combat. So we've washed it over with the white snow camouflage and put a slogan in Russian, at least we hope it's in Russian, on the turret, which effectively says "From the women of Leningrad to the front." That's really just a plug for them, and means that they've financed the tank. The tank has a crew of 4, that's 3 in the turret and the driver obviously in the front. He has clutch and brake steering, quite unusual on a big tank, but it seems to work. The KV-1 actually worked very well. It's got the F-34 gun, the same gun as you'll find in the T-34. It's a 76mm weapon and was quite adequate in its day, though towards the latter part of the war it tended to be rather outclassed, especially by the new German tanks with high velocity guns. It's got some applique armour. You'll notice there's added armour in front of the driver and on the side here, protecting the turret ring. That was added afterwards. It's powered by a V12 diesel, what the Russians called the V2 model, which is a 550 horsepower diesel, which really is quite adequate for a tank of this size because it pushes it along. It's as good as pretty well anything. In Britain, we had a 600 horsepower engine when we adapted the Rolls-Royce Merlin to the Meteor, but apart from that, we didn't have more powerful engines either. And between 550 and 600 horsepower, there's not a lot of difference anyway. Another thing you'll notice about this tank, all the British tanks and all the Russian tanks have rear drive. So the engine and gearbox are at the back of the tank, driving a rear sprocket. On a Russian, on a German or an American tank, you'll find normally they go for front rocket drive. There isn't a great deal of difference, but it's just a preference, and that's the way the Russians did things. But the tank is otherwise very good. They say that the internal layout of the turret is not as good as it might be, but that's typical of Russian tanks. They aren't very effective inside at the best of times, and it does make them more difficult to fight. For instance, the tank commander is acting as the loader, which isn't really the best system. It means that the tank commander's taken his eye off the ball, if you like, and he's really needed in the turret to keep an eye on things. But instead of that, he's busy loading the gun, which isn't really the most effective way of doing things. But that's the way the KV works. It's a good, tough, reliable tank, and really very advanced. It does show how advanced the Russians were in terms of tank design in the early part of the war, really putting us to shame in many respects. So it was a very effective vehicle, one of the best of its type.
If you do like the product we're putting out on YouTube, our tank chats, the various other things we're doing, if you can support us, we are an independent charity, that would really help. So subscribe to these broadcasts we make, and please, if you've got the opportunity, help supporting us by joining our patron scheme.